Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Shell Mendelson, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
It's a real pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from San Antonio. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about 5 steps to self-accommodation in the workplace. Specifically, we're going to be talking about neurodiversity, ADHD, autism spectrum. We're going to be talking about these sorts of things and how individuals can both self-accommodate, but also how organizations and leaders can accommodate for individuals,
Right.
To hopefully have inclusive workplaces and have workplaces that are empowering to include everyone and have workplaces of belonging for everyone. As we get started, I wanted to share Shell's bio with everybody. Shell Mendelson has a master's in counseling with an emphasis on career and has helped hundreds of ADHD adults and young adults over the past 35 years find fulfilling and sustainable career direction. Shell is the author of the book, A Course for ADHD Adults and Teens, Unlock Your Career Path, available now for sale. Shell was diagnosed with ADHD late in life as an adult in 2010. Her book aims to help adults and teens develop confidence in taking clear next steps in their career, whether it be specific job, career path, lateral move, or with a new refined business model. Shell, a real pleasure to be with you. Anything you would like to highlight by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in?
Actually, that pretty much says it all. My book was launched in January, so that is a thing.
Wonderful.
Now it's available, and yeah, I still continue to work with people through the Your Next Career Move Masterclass, which I'm happy to talk about.
Yeah. Well, let's start with the book. I like to ask authors why this book, why now? Books are a labor of
Yeah.
love. It's a lot of effort. You have a book, you have a master class,
Yeah.
a class associated with it. Why this book? Why now?
Well, the master class is actually a deeper dive. We use the book obviously as the
Mhm.
resource, but I wrote it because it just was time. I had all the material for it. I've been doing career coaching and in the field for the past 35 years and working specifically with neurodivergent adults for the past 15 years following my own diagnosis, which was very enlightening and really
Mhm.
directed me to want to work with my tribe. Right. And as I was doing that throughout the process of the past 15 years, I was creating um, new information, new documents that were visual. I was trying to make things more neurodivergent friendly. In
Mhm.
other words, break things down, make it more graphic, make it something that was engaging, because very often we're faced with big blocks of text
Yeah.
in books, and reading becomes difficult and distracting. So I needed to find a way to make it more engaging. And that's what I said. Okay, now I'm going to do it. I'm finally going to do it. I'm going to break down this process that I've been doing in a way that is fun and makes the idea of finding a career direction easy and, like I said, fun, engaging, and something that will last and be sustainable over a lifetime. So
Well,
that
yeah,
was
and I
that
mean
was my motivation. Yeah.
well, that's a great motivation. And that's something that everyone wants. So whether you're neurotypical, neurodivergent, wherever on the spectrum, everyone wants a meaningful, engaging, impactful career. And we all
Yeah.
have different life stages. We all have different developmental stages, career stages. So we find ourselves in different places at different points in time, right? And so the
Yes.
reality is we all are navigating, trying to find the right place, the right position. So I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect there
Yes.
are actually a lot of nuggets of wisdom in your materials that are probably quite applicable to everybody, not just people who are neurodivergent, because we
Yes.
all are dealing with these types of things.
Yes. Well, I like to say that for any material that is truly ADHD slash neurodivergent friendly, that
Hmm.
it's perfect for everyone, of course.
Yeah, yeah,
And before I even wrote this, I was working with everybody across the
yeah.
spectrum, neurotypical people, everybody. And it wasn't again until I got my own diagnosis that I made the shift to just focusing on our tribe, basically. But it's really important, and I saw the need to take the process that I was doing, which is really based on what color's your parachute. So I want to give cred, of course, to my mentor and teacher, Richard Bowles, who wrote the book, What Color's Your Parachute, which I had been using for years with people, that process. And it's a process of identifying all the elements that make up one's ideal work. At the time, it was called the flower. I made the ship for our community to be I wanted to do basically an upgrade that just focused on this process for basically everyone across the spectrum, literally everyone. And I did that by changing the flower model to the career galaxy. So it's now each planet represents an aspect of your ideal work that
Mm.
is important to understand in terms of what are your must haves in each one of those areas. So it's really focused on you. It's really focused on not what's going to get you the job, not what the top 10 jobs are for people with ADHD, none of that, but it personalizes what your needs are so that you are the perfect representation of what is needed for any position that you're applying for or any uh, job or whatever that you're creating. If you're an entrepreneur and you want to start a company, you've got to have the right topic, right? So it really focuses on what it is that we want and what's going to keep us happy. So no matter what we're doing, we're going to be fulfilled, satisfied, and it's going to be sustainable. That's the main thing. It's not going to be something that we're going to do uh, do like job hopping, or we're going to do the next shiny object kind of thing. It's going to be something that will sit with us, just like what I do. I like to use myself as an example because I've been doing this work, like I said, for 35 years, and I've been doing this process for 30 years. And I love it because it's so it's always been engaging for me. It's always given me lots of flexibility, lots of opportunity to do different things, to make shifts, to expand on what I'm doing, to write the book, to do podcast, all these things that are
Hmm.
really
Hmm.
fun for me to do, things that I enjoy doing, which this is the form of getting my message out that I prefer because I just like having conversations with people and talking about this stuff. I have written articles. It's not my favorite thing to do. Writing is not like high on my list of skills that I want to be using out there, but I write. I'm a fairly decent writer, but now there's AI. There's so many other things that can, help boost what I'm doing. And I work with amazing people. So you get to, it allows me to work with the people who can help me get my message out. And this is, what I want for everyone. I want the way I feel about what I do to be what everybody gets to experience. And that's why I wrote the book. I said it's about time to get it out there in the world and have people have this easy way of really breaking things down. And easy means in the sense that the process is easy, but you're really diving into who you are. So
Yeah,
there's like a psychological, mental, emotional element to it as well, because you're getting to self-reflect quite a bit, and it's not always easy to say, uh, this is what I prefer versus what I think the world needs me to prefer. Do you see what I'm saying?
right.
It's very
Hmm.
different. It's really making it clear that this is who I am. This is what I need to be to optimize in the workplace, to do the very best work that I could possibly do for anyone, to be as productive as I can be. It starts with you and knowing what you want, right? And being able to clearly state that. So I want to
Yeah.
bring it back a little bit to when we, I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to bring it back to the work accommodation thing and how that process, that piece of it, which is it's only one piece of the process, but it's one of the most important pieces. So just to, if I
Yeah.
can bring that back. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate all that. I think that's all a really great foundation for what I think will be the rest of our conversation today. Um, and there are a variety of accommodations that can occur. And I do a fair amount of research in this space. I'm a professor. I do,
Mhm.
consulting and things like this podcast on the side, but I'm a professor in HR, workplace dynamics, those sorts of things. And I've done a fair amount of research on neurodiversity in the workplace and workforce accommodations and such.
Mm.
And the reality is, we're pretty bad at this. Still, it's gotten better. Over the last decade, things
Yeah.
have improved, but it's still there's a lack of awareness. There's a lack of both just basic policy in practice procedure towards these sorts of things on an organizational side, um, in terms of creating spaces, inclusive spaces of belonging. Um,
Hmm.
and then like you said, and as I said in the kind of the outset, then there's the employee side. There's self-accommodation, and so we're really going to focus more on the self-accommodation side in the remainder of our conversation today. But I just want to
Hmm.
acknowledge that there is a huge other piece here, and
Yeah.
I don't want to be dismissive of that because I absolutely
Yeah.
acknowledge that employers should 100% be held accountable for accommodating and creating safe spaces and creating places of employment where everyone can contribute and contributing meaningful, productive ways. So I just want to
Hmm.
say that from the outset. Now let's dive in and talk about. I know you have five different steps for self-accommodation in the workplace. Let's start to pick those apart and discuss those.
I may focus on like three of them
Sure.
more heavily, but um, essentially, when we talk about self-accommodation, it's kind of a twofold thing. Like, I don't think it's always necessary to tell people that you what your diagnosis is if you know how to self-accommodate. And if you have a conversation that's very honest with your employer about what you need to be optimized in the workplace. And
Right.
so my work is to empower other people to do that, to be able to, this is what I need. And can you, under these conditions, and you can find out whether or not the employer is number one, willing, or number two, able to accommodate. And if they're not, it may not even be a good fit. You see what I'm saying in terms of the hiring part of it.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes what I find, and HR people understand this as you do, that I think a very high percentage of neurodivergent individuals are placed in PIP programs. And
Mhm.
very often it's because they don't have an understanding for themselves of what their needs are to be able to articulate that. And and I'm here to say that people with ADHD, we are the movers and shakers, and
Mhm.
employers need us. You need
Yeah.
us to be in doing what you need us to do, and it needs to be very clearly stated how that can happen and what those accommodations need to be. So when I tell people to put together a self-accommodation plan, it's a whole process. They have to identify what works for them and what doesn't work for them. It actually starts with what doesn't work for them. So I ask my clients to just write down all the conditions that have been awful for them that have made their jobs almost impossible to do on and to be productive and to feel even good about showing up every day, right? So they write this whole list, and very often it's you would be amazed at how long some of those lists are, right?
Mhm.
Um, but then we take that and we flip it around, and for each one of those conditions, I ask them to write something that would be their opposite of that. their positive side, how they can state what they need, what the other side of that concern would look like. And so that's the start of really growing your must-haves for the work, the conditions that are important to you. It also gives you a talking point, something to discuss. Because I don't know, you tell me this: are employees able to tell you exactly what they need, what conditions they need to thrive? Are they able to have that
Sometimes, but
conversation?
usually they don't know. Yeah.
That's it. They don't know. So this is the way to really understand what your true needs are. And if you don't have that understanding, how can you possibly talk about it?
Yeah.
You know, I know you probably work with the ADA. Well, I was around when that whole thing started, right? And it was fine for people with disability, with physical disabilities, but
Right.
with it's not particularly good for people who are neurodivergent uh, in the workplace because it doesn't address those needs necessarily. But
I
we're
mean, so
different
so
at
so to be clear, it does cover those elements. It's just because they're not as obvious,
they're
it's
not as
harder.
obvious. Yeah.
It's harder for it to be covered. Yeah.
Well, it's also hard, I think, for the employee to identify it.
Yeah.
For them, what's going to be covered and what's not going to be covered, and they may be shy about it or overlook uh
Hmm.
what they actually do need because they really don't know. It's kind of like
Yeah.
the whole process I do is to enlighten yourself about what you need to thrive.
Right. Hmm.
And I think that is such an eye-opening experience for people to really be able to say, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize it, but I've never been in a workplace where I actually am able to sit at the kind of desk that works for me or have the kind of equipment that works for me or be in the surroundings that even work for me because I'm so distracted all the time.
Right.
People who work in those open space environments, some
Right.
people thrive on it and other people cannot do it at all, right? And those are neurodivergent people, right? So it doesn't even matter if you're it doesn't matter what the space is. If it doesn't work for that person, it just doesn't work.
Hmm.
So wouldn't it make sense for them to be able to say, this doesn't work for me. Is it possible for me to get it when I'm working on a project or something to get into a space that's a little bit quieter so I can focus? Because if the distractions are there and you've got this person who's got all these skills and who's beyond capable, and isn't that kind of a waste to put them in an
Exactly.
environment that
Yeah.
doesn't work for them, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So all of these things are detailed in the self-accommodation. And when I call it self-accommodation, those are the parts that you can do adjust yourself just because you know what they are. And you don't even have to talk to the employer. If you already know what they are and you're able to do some of those accommodations on your own, that allows you to have some relief, and the parts that you can't do on your own but are necessary for you because they're up there in the prioritized must-haves. Those are the things that you can discuss with your employer and see what the response is, right? Some employers are going to be accommodating and some are not. I mean, let's face it, that's just the way it is. So isn't it better to know if there's no way you can accommodate somebody, maybe there's a way or there's a process that they can use to identify a better option for themselves versus putting I know I'm maybe stepping out here. And it's tricky for me to talk about these PIP things with HR people because you know why. They get nervous, right? But it's better to know than not know if this person's going to be a good fit. Isn't it better for them to make the decision to leave if it's not a good fit for them than for you to have to go through this huge process to get it done? Sometimes months. And so the result is that I see these people in my class, and I know again I'm saying something that's probably uncomfortable for HR people because I've seen them kind of freak out a little bit when I say it. But isn't it better for them to know what those things are, to see again if this can be worked out in some way. And if it can't, then the employee doesn't have to go through a process of being crushed over
Yeah.
a period of months. And when I see them, trust me, they are crushed. Their confidence is very low. um, Going through the process is painful, very painful for them. And sometimes it doesn't even apply to the work they were doing or that they thought they were signing up for. Yet they've got double the pressure to get things done in a certain way. Uh, and then ultimately the result is often just getting laid off or fired, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we all know essentially what that's about. I really want to offer employers an option for their employees and for themselves to save yourself the the money, number one, of putting. I mean, how expensive is it to put people through these programs, right? So I talk about this because it does have to do with working conditions, and it basically has everything to do with working conditions. Um, and I hope I'm not canceled or anything, but
No, you're
I
absolutely
want,
right. I mean,
yeah,
ultimately, we want to make sure it's going to work for both ways.
both
Or
ways. Exactly.
organizations 100% have to make reasonable accommodations. It's required under law. I mean,
Yeah.
it's required legally, but it's also required morally and ethically. So, I mean, organizations have to require reasonable accommodations, and there are times where certain accommodations in certain circumstances aren't considered reasonable, and courts will uphold that in certain circumstances. But most of the time, especially when you're
Yeah.
talking about neurodivergent types of accommodations, most of the time those are seen as reasonable accommodations. And so the matter of the fact is, if you as an individual are aware enough to know what you need and
Yeah.
aware enough to know what to request what you need, organizations are usually going to be required to provide it legally.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
and so advocate for yourself. Advocate for
Advocate for
yourself.
yourself.
Yeah.
And I mean, from the employer's perspective, how much easier would it be if somebody actually knew these things and you didn't have to go
Yeah.
digging to figure it out? And if you are able to do it, and again, who defines reasonable? Doesn't the employer define reasonable? So reasonable for you may not be reasonable for that person. So it makes sense that the person understands that if that employer cannot reasonably provide an accommodation to them, that this may not be the best fit for them.
Well,
And maybe there's another,
the employer to an extent defines reasonable.
right.
The courts will ultimately decide whether they agree, um, based on case law. But if an employer has a completely unreasonable threshold, there's a reasonable person standard applied to it, right?
Well, so what I'm saying is that if the judges don't have aren't neurodivergent, they're not going to understand, you know? So telling you you've got to be in the brain of somebody to really to understand the thinking about whether or not something's going to work or not, or whether they're now if the employer does, is not able for whatever reason to accommodate. And this is we're not even talking legalities. We're just talking about logic here, and
Yeah.
just what's workable. If they value that person to the extent that they know that once they get them in the right situation, they're going to have like a superstar in their hand.
Right.
They're going to
Yeah.
have they're going to have somebody who's going to just fly, right? Because when you're in, I talk to so many people that really like their jobs, except for two or three things that just make it almost impossible for them, and then they end up in those PIP programs because of
Right.
those things that that could easily be tweaked, right? But they
Right.
don't feel comfortable speaking to the employer about it because they feel like, what are the co-workers going to say if they get this or they get that? There's always, there are lots of things going on, lots of concerns going on all the way around. And it's also how comfortable the person is to have that conversation with the employer, you know, if they feel intimidated or if they feel like they're not being listened to or they're
Sure.
being seen as being like a troublemaker. Very often, I mean, that happens a lot, does it not?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
you bring up so many really important questions, and I just want to reiterate that it's from both directions. It's important. I mean,
from both.
really, organizations should proactively be creating a space where individuals, like to your point, they don't fear coming forward to to identify areas where they need accommodation. Like it should
Yeah.
be completely safe for me to come forward and say what I need.
Yeah.
And I as an employer should create that environment, right? And so then my people can self-identify, they can come forward, they can tell their supervisor, their boss what they need, and then it can go
Yeah.
both directions, and then we can help each other. And ultimately that's what
It's
we all
ultimate.
want because then we can get the most out of each other. Like we can have the best productivity, we can have the best innovation, we can have the best synergies and so on and so forth. And we can treat each other the best, right? Nobody wants to be put on a pip either direction, right? Nobody, and
Yeah.
a boss doesn't want to put an employee on a performance improvement plan. An employee doesn't want to be put through that process. It's miserable for everybody. So like let's not drag people through that process. Let's just like identify what needs to happen so people can have a good employment experience. Well,
Thank you.
Shell, I know the time. I need to let you go here. The time has flown by. As we wrap things
Yeah.
up for today, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, where they can find your book, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Well, self-accommodation and understanding what your needs are in your working conditions is incredibly important, being able to articulate it. So I'll always say that. And what I do is help people with that. And I have a class called the Your Next Career Move Masterclass, which follows a book. It's included with the masterclass. And I just work with a small group of people at any given time. I'm going on my fourth year now straight where this has been the baseline for working with me. And it's been just an incredible experience of being able to help people. So you can get a hold of me at career coaching with Shell, SHELL.com. And the book itself is at unlockyourcareerpath.com. So you can get started if you aren't able to take the master class, you can at least get started with the book. There's a fillable PDF version of it, which is great for college students. So I really want to emphasize that. It's the way to figure out what to major in
Hmm.
before you make the mistake of majoring in the wrong thing and ending up graduating with nowhere to go or
Hmm.
still uncertain. It's the way also for high school students to make some decisions about whether or not they even want to go to college. So this
Hmm.
book is I think very, very important for people to at least begin to use to get some ideas and to begin the process. And this is for everyone again. This is for everyone. So unlockyourcareerpath.com, careercoachingwithshell.com. You can schedule an introductory call with me.
Wonderful. Shell, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Shell can do for you. Check out the book, the resources, um, all that she has to offer you, to help your loved ones, to help employees in your organization. And as always, I
Exactly.
hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.